everyone. Welcome back to another special edition of Rosie Talks, and my name is Ayonnah Tinsley. So in this little sub-series, what we're going to do today is we're going to be speaking to real women working in STEM, and some of these careers are highlighted in the characters in my book, This Is What an Engineer Looks Like. So the reason why I wrote my children's book, This Is What an Engineer Looks Like, is because I wanted to highlight a diversity in STEAM and hopefully geared towards more elementary school students to show them that they're able to do any STEAM jobs they want as long as they have ambition and nothing else really has to factor into that besides their passion. And I'm so excited to be able to speak with Rosemary Wardley today. Rosemary is a cartographer and graphics editor at National Geographic. Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm great. Okay, so to start the interview, my first question for you is, what made you want to get into a STEM job?
Yeah, I don't think when I was growing up, STEM wasn't exactly, as well known of an acronym as it was, but I had I was really interested in a lot of things growing up. And it wasn't until I was going off to college that I kind of started to think about what my interests were. I was interested in history and social studies and science. So, it was when I was going off to college that I started to think about what topics really interest me. And I was interested in history and social studies and culture and movement and things like that. And my father actually suggested geography to me. And I really liked it because the more I learned about it, it was a really interesting combination of both kind of science and art and kind of putting those two together. I think, I always had an interest in a lot of varied studies and wasn't as big of a fan of math and kind of that as much, but I was really interested in science, especially environmental science and things like that. So finding geography was really helpful to me.
I really like that you mentioned that how much STEM isn't just always just math, because that's kind of how I got into it too. I saw that like in airplanes, it combines it with art for the graphics, and then of course nature with how birds flew and things like that. So that actually leads me right into my next question. So what role does art have in your job?
Oh, it has a huge role. Art and kind of storytelling is a big thing that we use, kind of how we describe cartography. And I should preference that I always like to kind of refer to myself as a geographer first and foremost, because when I started, I loved maps growing up, and I think a lot of people do, but I never really thought that I would be, like, my job would be solely making maps and things like that. So having a strong geographic background was really helpful. But, art and design is really crucial to it, because from the colors that we choose to the layout of how things either put on the page or how they are built into a website, those are all super important. And so that's what I really appreciate about geography and cartography, is getting to kind of use both sides of my brain in that sense.
Yeah, I saw your Pride and Prejudice map that you made about New York City, and I just love how everything literally just fit together. The colors and everything, just nothing looked out of place. It was I love like the design choices with everything. So with that, I was wondering, what are the hardest parts of your job or cartography or design, and how do you get through these harder parts of your job?
The hardest parts are, one, finding the data and then kind of synthesizing it down and finding really like the story that comes with the data, and then how to most effectively display it for people and tell that story so that they can be interested kind of really quickly, but then also be able to dive down deeper and get more out of the graphics. So with every map and graphic that we make, we want it to be eye-catching and something that somebody will look at, but then also be substantive and give a lot of information if possible.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have any inspirations for when it just seems like, I know sometimes when I had to design flyers for school, I get into like a rut, like I never know what looks right. Do you have any inspiration to kind of get you out of this funks, if you ever had any of those?
Yeah, I always look to a lot of different books, either various atlases or design books. There is, specifically for my field, I'm part of a society called the North American Cartographic and Information Society. And we put out something we call the Atlas of Design, which is just a compilation of maps and graphics that have been put out that people, we put it out every 2 years and people will submit things to it. And it's kind of just chosen by a committee. And it's always great to look there because there's just a real variety in styles and in the way that people display things. I use Twitter a lot that way too, just to really follow along. So social media is really helpful. When I do kind of miss in times right now, I always love also just going into the library and looking at different books and what's been done in the past. I think you can't beat that. So that's something that's a little harder now, but there's a lot of virtual resources that are out there too. The Library of Congress has a great online wealth of past maps. I look to art and things like that too.
Yeah, I definitely miss going to the library too. The one in my area, you're not allowed to stay there for more than 30 minutes anymore. So that really sucks, especially with studying. So that also goes along with this question. What other ways has quarantine impacted you with your job?
Yeah, I think that, and the biggest thing for me has been just missing that little bit of back and forth with my colleagues. We have, that's really the biggest thing that has been so helpful working at National Geographic is just you get so much on the job training from your colleagues. Everyone kind of has their own specialty, and everyone is really open to sharing their skills and things like that. And so I was super intimidated when I started working there. I came in as an intern, not even in the maps department, just in our education department, and then was fortunate to get a job there. But yeah, there's so much. So having that kind of in-person interaction and just to be able to show people things and get your ideas and your back and forth, because there's a whole lot. And I mean, most of the maps that we work on are a team effort, and so you're always kind of going back and forth and iterating off of each other. Thankfully, we use Slack, and we've now come and figured out ways to replicate that virtually, but it's still not quite the same as in person, I would say.
Yeah. So some questions about National Geographic. So I saw that like it was always your dream job. So was there a specific reason behind why National Geographic was the perfect fit for you?
I think it's just one of those really well-known things growing up. Geography was always interesting to me, but when I was a kid, it was kind of falling out of favor as being a specific course that was taught. So it always kind of had to be something that you were interested on your own. I was really fortunate to have a neighbor growing up who taught geography, and she was actually National Geographic has always kind of taken a role in the United States in encouraging and kind of helping geographic education. And my neighbor was actually a teacher who would come to National Geographic and get teacher training. And so growing up, we of course had the magazine, and then she would always come back from Washington D.C. and kind of have these atlases and all these different things. So it was just the beacon that I knew of for making maps and studying geography. And then even throughout college, when I was studying geography, I knew I was interested in a whole lot of different things, but I didn't know exactly where it would take me. So it was just sort of an easy, like I always said, I'll just work at National Geographic, and that sort of made sense to people. It's sort of a double-edged sword though, because now people don't really, they don't realize how many opportunities there really are for geography. I'm really fortunate. I've been in the field for about 13, 14 years now. And just in that time, with the rise of smartphones and just web mapping, you really can apply geography and cartography in many different fields. So it's not just limited to media. And that's the thing that I always want to impart on people is you use it in many different fields. Geography is the study of the earth and the people and places within it. So you can, if you think about it, you can apply it in any field that you like.
I know. I just love that's one amazing thing about STEM. You can connect like almost all branches of science together in
Mhm.
some way. And that's like a really big reason why I added cartography to my book. I actually like just recently learned about the job to my book too. So I really just want something that I know a lot of others wouldn't really know that much about, because cartographers have actively a giant impact on our society
Mhm.
and through like almost every part of our day or something we do every day, which is travel.
Mhm.
So my next question is, what's the future of cartography, or what do you see it and evolving to in a few years?
Sure. Well, I think the future of cartography is just more web cartography, digital cartography, interactive. And then I also a little bit, probably people are looking into AI and artificial intelligence and VR, and the way that it's used in that sense sphere. We were experimenting at National Geographic, which with in our museum exhibits with having more virtual reality, and some of that was kind of putting yourself on the map. So kind of experimenting in that respect. Um, I think there's, people. I do still think there's also, we've come kind of in the past decade. Everyone's always said like, is the paper map going away? But it seems like there still is definitely a desire to still have those, maybe just in a different format, or the combination of having a digital and a paper um, product together and how they can interact
Yeah,
is really
coexist.
exciting.
Yeah, I would love to experience the VR for maps and anything like that. That sounds awesome. So, back to when you said that, like, of course, yeah, not a lot of elementary schools even teach about cartography or about really go more in depth with how much geography impacts everything. So, what do you think are some ways that middle school and elementary school, and maybe even high schools, can like actively keep supporting the cartography and geography communities in education?
Yeah. Well, I think there has actually been a good kind of change shift in the last 5 years or so in realizing that geography is much more than just memorizing places and capitals and things like that. That it really goes into our global society, and feeling and seeing how people kind of connect. And so I think kind of redefining geography is one step in enlightening people and saying, you already are teaching geography. You just have to think of it in this other sense. I do believe, I would like to kind of see people still learning about maps and how to properly read maps, because especially when we're all just using digital devices and maybe plugging in um, one spot, directions from one spot to another. I think you kind of lose a little bit of that spatial awareness and how things are connected.
Yeah.
And there's different ways you can do that. There's really kind of fun outdoorsy ways with orienteering, where you can do projects where you go outside and kind of learn how to read a map and how to read the landscape. Just learning about using maps. They're used a lot these days in publication as displaying statistics or different values. And so having the knowledge of being able to look at that and see like, oh, is this data formulated the right way? So people can, teachers can use, there's a lot of resources out there that teachers can integrate into their lesson plans and just showing things visually. It's just an easier way of taking, most of the data we get is big Excel files and tables. And so it's the same, it's just taking those numbers and translating them into a visual sense. I think using maps, it can open the door for people like myself that didn't really understand like numbers right away, but you see something visually and you can understand it that way.
Yeah, that sounds like that could be a great educational tool for especially students that struggle with math classes and things like that. And I think I would definitely be interested in learning how to really read a map, because I used to be definitely directionally challenged until I started driving. So I definitely got better at that. But I want to try to like be less dependent on Waze, because I know that there's so many in Google Maps, because I know that there's still so many conscious ways that like technology kind of just blinds us from what's actually out there and things like that. So yeah, that is a very interesting point. So like you mentioned before, it kind of sounds like you're definitely an artist with how you style your maps and what you choose to include. And I feel that artists always have a certain twist to their art. So what do you think is your twist when you create maps?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's hard to say because I feel like a lot of what I do, and I think a lot of people tend to do this, but is you're borrowing from people that people that you see and examples. I always use a lot of color, which is maybe good and bad. And I think I tend to I ask my colleagues to kind of help me um, kind of pull that in a little bit. I don't know, I've done so many different styled things, but yeah, I mean, the use of color is really important, but it's also, it's something that you have to keep in mind. One thing that we always have to think on is making sure that when we use color, that it's still visible to people that might have color blindness, which is much more common than you realize. So that's always something good to know about. And just, you also have to think about people have assumptions based on color a lot, red being bad and,
Yeah.
or hot and blue being cold and things like that. So using color, but using it kind of as sparingly.
Yeah.
But then there's also, I mean, in that same respect, a friend of mine recently ran a program or a contest just for fun for people to make what he called monochrome maps, where it's just two colors.
Yeah.
So it could just be black and white, or it could be white and another shade of red or green. And that was an important kind of test to see, okay, if you're not using color, how can you still, how can you make this map show emphasis, in different, using textures or styles and different patterns and things like that. So it's always good to kind of go the opposite way of your typical crutch or something like that.
Your answer is so interesting because of course it like exactly exemplifies why exactly art goes directly with STEM, or just even just saying STEAM, because yeah, when people see colors they make assumptions. That's all psychological sciences, especially the science of finding out what colors can make things more accessible for people. So that's so important that you mentioned the accessibility for maps for others. And so I think, so another question I had is, what advice would you give to yourself when you were in high school or college?
Ooh, probably just not to be afraid to ask questions. Anytime I kind of think back and have discovered something, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I get interested in that before? I think back and I was like, oh, I probably was a little too nervous to ask a question. So just to be interested in all of those things. Yeah. And, if I was ever struggling with something, to ask questions. Yeah, just to try out different things, to just always pursue, I guess I in geography, I never really settled on one specific discipline within it. And I think that served me well. So I think I would just stick with that and just saying, like, you're curious about a lot of different things. Yeah. Keep asking those questions and seeing where things can kind of come together and work that way.
Mm-hmm. And then, so yeah, along with doing a lot, I was wondering, you might have mentioned this earlier, but can you say again, what are some of your interests outside of cartography?
Yeah, let's see here. I mean, like I said, I always loved learning about different cultures and history and travel. And so that was always, luckily, that is something that even today in my job, I do a lot of work on historical maps and historical topics that we do. I'm a big proponent of sports, and I loved playing sports and being outdoors when I was a kid. And I think that's similar to kind of what I've learned about Rosie Riveters is, sports was really important to me in that it kind of helped me meet people outside of my typical bubble, and also gave me the confidence to know that I could try something and not get it right the first time and keep going again. So anytime I can kind of think about sports in a mapping sense, I always love doing that. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's fun. I'm interested in a whole lot of things. So I just always kind of, that's why I love geography. Again, like I love I love the ocean. I love rivers, combining those things together, the environment, all those things just really do well with studying geography.
I love how passionate you are about your job, that even your interests, they all can come back to cartography. That's like some life goals. I hope that I can be able to find a job like that. And
You know,
then to wrap up our fabulous interview, so I was wondering, what advice would you give to high school students that are either interested in pursuing your job, of course don't have as many access or education on it, or even advice to students kind of like me that are interested in just so many things, but then just sometimes people tell them it's too much, but like you made it work and you are able to incorporate it in so many aspects. So just any advice about this?
I think my advice is if you find something that you're passionate in, yeah, try to find somebody to ask questions about it. Like I said, my neighbor who just knew a little bit about geography from how she taught it was able to really spark an interest for me. If you are finding something, an article or something that somebody publishes, like look their name up and try to shoot them an email or send them a message via Twitter or Instagram or something like that. There's a lot of resources out there, or just a lot of people out there doing things. And, I love when people just kind of email me kind of out of the blue. I don't know how they found stuff, but if you find it, that's what I would say is just learn as much about it as you can. That's what I tried to do before I was going to school. And even if you're not certain, that's okay. You can always, it's better to try something and then, check it off your list and be like, okay, I'm not interested. And then kind of to the same point, after I graduated, a lot of my my classmates were going right into graduate school. And my advisor said, go out and get some real world experience first if you can, because, this will always be here. You can always come back to it. And that was really pivotal for me.
Awesome. Okay, so to end our Rosie River talks, we like to channel our inner Rosie Riveter and say we can do it. So you want to do that on 3?
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. We can do
We
it.
can do it. And my nickname is Rosie, so this is just right up my alley.
Yeah, thank you so much for today. I learned so much from you and got so much inspiration, and all your answers were great.
Fantastic. I'm really glad to meet you. I can't wait to get a copy of the book. I'm going to order a bunch right now. And yeah, keep up the good work. This is so fun.